Adnan better not be looking.
Is being recorded.
Okay, let me share so we can get started. So we both would like to express our appreciation to the Jewish Family Services of Western Massachusetts for recognizing the need to give extra attention to the resettlement of the newly arrived Afghans and for organizing this series of presentations. We're so appreciative of you setting aside your time to come, and we certainly hope it'll be worth your while. Our approach in this presentation is to talk about Afghanistan. I have two things going on here, sorry. To talk about Afghanistan, the country, the geography, the ethnicities, religions in a very general way, as well as family structures, gender dynamics, basic health and hygiene, and of course, to focus on school-related issues. Our presentation takes about 40 minutes, and so you're welcome to put questions along the way into chats or comments. And of course, we'll open up for discussion at the end, and we will meet again next week to go over more of the issues that might have come up. I always apologize for giving a very general introduction when, of course, it's a complicated culture with numerous languages and cultures, religious practices, ethnicities, educational differences, social and economic differences. And it's, of course, hard to give an introduction without generalizing. So my caveat up front that not everything will apply to everyone. Nearly every image that we are using are ones that are of our own, from our own collection, and we are aware that there are many sensitivities among Afghans around photographs, particularly of women. So there are a few images by the Afghan photographer Fatima Husseini, but we're very careful otherwise. And I will let Zala introduce herself first, and then I will continue.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for your time to learn more about Afghanistan and Afghan culture to help better the Afghan community who recently arrived in the US. So this is Zala, and I'm from Afghanistan and from a province in the west of Afghanistan, and I lived, I would say, myself as a refugee most of my life, except 2 years that I was born, and then at the age of 2, I became a refugee. We went to Iran and then Pakistan, and then maybe for 2 years in Kabul, and then I came to US in 2010. And I have been living between US and Afghanistan since then, which luckily I could travel and work in Afghanistan at the same time that I was also in US. I have my MA in International Economics and Finance as a Fulbright scholar at Brandeis University. I study, but also I have a degree in Social Development Studies, and I have always been passionate, I would say, about girls' education and women economic empowerment for my home country. And that's the reason that I have been part of like a nonprofit that I co-founded in 2010, and that helped, that worked on for girls' education mainly in human rights related issues. And also last year, I co-founded a social enterprise to create jobs for women in Kabul. And we were able to reopen it even of 2 or 3 months after the Taliban power. So we reopened it, and we are still working in Kabul to help women have jobs. And that's the. And other than that, I have helped Afghan, I would say, evacuee who came in August. I was, as a consultant, I worked for 2 months at the Fort Dix base, where I like witnessed a lot of issues that they were facing at the base, and that they will be facing once they actually leave the base, and then go in the like start like the real life in US, whether it was education or like navigating the life here in US, or their children, parenting, and different sorts of issues that we will be happy to talk today and address those issues. Yeah, so I have a son who's 4 years old. That's all about me.
Thank you, Zala. There's lots to know about Zala, but this is a good start. So my name is Rachel Lair, and my career has been formulated and colored by Afghanistan and its surroundings for a very long time. I took up Persian as an undergraduate, and the dialects of which are spoken in Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan. And I took it because it fit in my schedule, because that's what you do when you're 20 years old and you think, well, try another language. I fell in love with the language very quickly and went on to pursue language and linguistics for my PhD. I studied in Iran before the Iranian Revolution and traveled in Afghanistan before the Soviet invasion, and then was awarded a Fulbright in Soviet Tajikistan to work on the language. Ultimately, I wrote the first modern descriptive grammar of Pashai, which is a minority language spoken in rural parts of Eastern Afghanistan. It's possible that some of you have Pashai speakers in your communities. I've heard about some of the schools in the area that do. So I spent a great deal of time in Afghanistan over the past 20 years in a rural community, both as a linguist and ethnographer, and as a part of the community. I helped members start an NGO called Rubia that was an income generation project for women with a focus on heritage embroidery. And during the Obama civilian surge years of 2010, 2011, I also worked for multiple US government agencies as a consultant, helping to prepare their staff in Afghan culture before their deployments. Zala and I have worked together for quite a few years on various projects, and including several grants conducting research on Afghan women's leadership and authority at many scales. We work with our colleague, Jennifer Fleury at the University of Colorado Boulder, and which is actually where I live in New Hampshire, but I happen to be in Boulder right now. So as you can see, I have a very varied background, often with one foot in Afghanistan and the other in the US. And it's a mix of experiences I bring to this training. The fact that I learned my lessons the hard way, because I have made every possible intercultural mistake, and most people were kind enough to guide me towards better choices and better behaviors. And for that, I'm much appreciative. It's always nice in an Afghan context to begin with the language, and the very broad Islamic greeting across the Islamic world would be Assalamu alaikum, which is Arabic. It means peace be upon you. And the response is always and upon you peace, wa alaikum assalam. And I put that out there, number one, because I'm a linguist and I believe in language gestures in all kinds of ways. And also because I know that Afghans will very much appreciate when people use phrases from their languages. Afghanistan is a country that sits on the crossroads of major ancient cultures between East and West at the heart of the old Silk Road. Its location is more often defined by where it is not than where it is. It's not the Middle East, it's not Central Asia, and it's not South Asia, but it's kind of bits and pieces of some of those things. The population of Afghanistan is about 37.5 million, and the capital city, Kabul, has 4.5 million residents. Afghanistan continues to confound its so-called guests, its invaders, its occupiers. It's the home of Rumi, the poet, and the game of polo, and the game of backgammon. It's often described as rough and rugged and unconquerable. And I also want to say with all my heart that it is breathtakingly beautiful. The cultures of Afghanistan have been influenced over the years by Buddhist monks who traveled through from the east, the raiding hordes of Turkic tribes from the north, the indigenous Indo-European and Indo-Aryan cultures, and of course, Islam, which has profoundly and repeatedly continued to transform Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a landlocked country with scant water. All the rivers run through it. The Hindu Kush Mountains divide the country northeast to southwest, and there is desert in the south and steppe in the north. Many of the recent arrivals here are from the southeastern part of the country. The climate is arid, rarely below 20 degrees. And so in the summer, it can be very hot and humid in the east, while dry in Kabul because of the altitude of nearly 6,000 feet. Afghanistan is more than 70% rural, and most people are subsistence farmers, and it takes the work of many family members to make ends meet. Drought has been a persistent problem for years. There's far more arable land than there is water to cultivate, and water rights and land ownership are continuous sources of tension and conflict. There is a saying that Kabul can be without gold, but not without snow, which means that snow bodes well for the upcoming agricultural season. Nevertheless, the Northeast winter is longer and harsher than what the Afghans are accustomed to. This is a challenge that we've just gotten through, I suppose. Just to point out, this is a place called Bamiyan in central part of Afghanistan, where, believe it or not, there are swan boats that you can pedal around this gorgeous lake. Child labor is common in Afghanistan. In the city, children are often sent out to sell products on the streets or to run shops. In the countryside, they do agricultural work. And often in urban areas, children work in mechanic shops or convenience stores, or all kinds of ways that you will see children in public trying to raise money for their families. Let me tell you just a bit about the history of Afghanistan. It was never colonized by the British, and though 3 wars were fought over their attempts to colonize Afghanistan, they never succeeded. And this is quite a point of pride among Afghans. The borders of Afghanistan were determined during the late 19th century, where Russian and British colonial powers were vying for territory, influence, wealth, and resources, and they battled what was known as the Great Game. Afghanistan was conquered by neither, but had its borders defined as a buffer between the 2 imperial powers. Political conflict in the 1970s led to the Soviet invasion in 1979, which drove over 3 million Afghan refugees into Pakistan. This is the period of time in which Shahzala became a refugee. And it gave rise to numerous Mujahideen factions bolstered in Pakistan and funded by the US. The US proxy war ended with the Soviet withdrawal in 1989, and the US interest in Afghanistan rather evaporated with it. A civil war raged among the Mujahideen factions until 1996, when the Taliban movement rose in response. Their Islamic emirate came out of the Islamic schools called madrasas that were educating young Afghans in Pakistan. They put an end to the civil war, but they created a pariah state, plunging the country deeper into poverty and isolation. This ostensibly ended with the US invasion in October 2001. Afghanistan is made up of numerous ethnicities, languages, and tribal and non-tribally organized people. The languages have roots in Indo-European languages, Turkic languages, and Indo-Aryan languages. So they come from multiple different language families. None of the languages of Afghanistan are related genetically, as a linguist would say, to Semitic, which is to Arabic, which is a Semitic language. So though there is a much vocabulary from Arabic in their language, in the Afghan languages, and the script is a modified Arabic script, they're not related languages. The dominant political group or largest ethnic group and language group are the Pashtuns. You can see them in green on the map, and they're not only in the south and east of the country, but also in bits and pieces around the north. You've heard, I'm sure, of the Pashtuns. The Taliban are predominantly Pashtun. They have been, but the Pashtuns have been the monarchs and elected presidents of Afghanistan as well. Pashtuns are, for the most part, Sunni Muslims, and many Pashtuns also speak Dari, which is the Persian of Afghanistan. So the next population in size is the Dari-speaking group, Dari. It's also called Tajik or Persian or Farsi, whatever you choose. Those are kind of political distinctions to some extent. And they also they're shown in purple around on the map. And they're also found throughout the country, and they are mostly Sunni Muslim. Hazara make up about 9% of the population, mostly in the central region, that kind of pinkish purple, known as the Hazara Jat, and they speak a dialect of Dari, known as Hazaragi. They've been seen as the most marginalized group, politically and socially. They practice Shia Islam, and because of that, they've been persecuted by Pashtun governments, by warlords, and most recently under the Taliban, and with massive genocide incidents. Many fled to Iran during the past 40 years of conflict. Hazaras also migrated to Quetta in the turn of the 20th century and are now Pakistanis. And then in the northern part of the country, I'll just briefly say, Turkmen and Uzbek and numerous languages spoken there. As you can see, what interests me in this map is that the languages spoken in Afghanistan also are found over the borders, and it gives you a sense of the influences from outside the country that come to bear in Afghanistan as well. Over the years, many of these rival groups have competed for land, resources, and power, and it's contributed to cycles of conflict and dissonance between and among tribes and ethnicities. And loyalties tend to be to kin, to ethnicity, to tribe. It's also the case that the prejudices and rivalries between families and tribes and ethnicities are not left behind in Afghanistan, but rather they bring them with them to the diaspora. Just a quick reminder of who is the Afghan and what is the Afghani. So the Afghani is what Afghan currency is called. This is very old currency I happen to have a picture of. And of course, the people are called Afghan. Afghan society is steeped in Islam, and it is the central organizing principle in most Afghans' lives. The one thing that is common to all Afghans is their commitment to Islam as both a belief system and as a social program. So the idea being that a unity of belief is linked to collective well-being, resulting in social order. And Islam brings a very strong sense of morality. As I said, Sunni Muslims make up about 90% of the population. Shia Muslims are about 10%. But both Sunni and Shia follow the religious texts of the Quran, the Hadith, the words and actions of the Prophet, and the 5 pillars of Islam, known as prayer, charity, the month-long fast of Ramadan, the Hajj, that is the pilgrimage to Mecca, and the declaration of the profession of faith, known as the Shahada. The virgin birth of Jesus is upheld in Islam, and Jesus is considered the penultimate prophet and mentioned throughout the Quran, and Mary, or Maryam, is revered as well. Islam pervades all aspects of life. The sayings of the prophet are told often. People pray or choose not to pray multiple times a day. The clothing that people wear is Islamically informed, modest and loose-fitting in general. And Islam also informs what is permissible, that which is halal, from marriage partners to foods, and what is haram, those things that are not permissible, such as pork or alcohol. And many other aspects in social interactions and life cycle rituals are dictated by Islam. Mosque attendance is much more of a male activity in Afghanistan than, particularly among the Sunnis, than females. There are numerous holidays, religious holidays. I'm just going to go over a couple of them because they've recently happened. The Islamic calendar is lunar, and there's also a solar Afghan calendar, so that can be complicated and confusing sometimes. But the dates for Islamic holidays don't line up with the Gregorian calendar. And this year, Ramadan began April 3rd, and it's already ended. But it's a month of fasting and spiritual reflection from sunup to sundown. And families often get up before sunrise to have a meal and then not take food or water until the evening break fast. And it's called iftar. And so it's a celebratory time. The iftar is a celebratory time for friends and families, and children receive new clothes, and it's totally appropriate to say Ramadan Kareem. It's also true that children may choose to fast once they reach puberty, though it may be earlier in some families, and that certainly would have an impact on school attendance and performance. Once the month of Ramadan ends, it ends with the Eid of breakfast, or Eid al-Fitr, and it's appropriate to give baskets of sweets and candies at that time and to say Eid Mubarak. Children receive all kinds of special gifts at that time. And of course, there are other holidays, but I won't go over them now. Birthday celebrations are not customary in Afghanistan, and until recently, And still, actually, in many cases, births are not recorded officially. Afghans often estimate their age and choose their own birthdays. And I heard a joke from a friend of mine who worked at Fort Dix that they were going to have a big birthday party with a big cake for everybody whose birthday was January 1st, because January 1st is a very popular chosen date for a birthday when Afghans are filling out paperwork. Other core concepts that are organizing principles in Afghan society include honor, family, and gender roles. Afghan communities, that is the villages and rural regions, tend to be self-governing. There has never been much reach of the government into the rural regions. The government is seen as corrupt, rapacious, unreliable, and unavailable. The lack of services from the central government is not new. It's always been that way. Suspicion runs high of government representation and authorities. Therefore, Afghans prefer to avoid authorities and manage their affairs themselves. So developing trust and positive relationships to government representatives and authorities will be new for the Afghans and will take time. And this has been one of the primary challenges that service providers have mentioned to us as we've been doing some of these presentations. Much social behavior is influenced by Afghans' awareness of their personal honor. And honor refers to a person's reputation, their prestige, their value. It's how they are perceived by the community at large. And a person's reputation precedes them in all things. I like to think of it as a wheelbarrow. So generations of their families are kind of riding up front with their honor, their piety, their wealth, their humility, their largesse. So as an individual is responsible for all that he or she is pushing along in that so-called wheelbarrow as they go out into the world. And so in this way, an individual embodies much more than just themselves when they put their reputation on the line. They're doing so for their current, previous, and future family members. And it's quite a different way of thinking about one's dignity and honor than most Americans have. And it actually it's first and foremost in most people's thinking. And so it's very important. So most Afghans consider a person's behavior to be reflective of their family. So when a person's behavior is perceived to be dishonorable, their family shares the shame. And if this occurs in the wider sphere, this dishonor may implicate their ethnic group, their tribe, or their religion. So preservation of honor and community opinion is often at the forefront of people's minds in all things that they do. It influences people to behave conservatively in accordance with social expectations, to avoid drawing attention to themselves or risk doing something perceived to be dishonorable. And it's the perception of dishonor, even more so than the dishonor, that really matters. The senior male of the family is responsible to protect the honor and well-being of the family, particularly as it concerns the behavior of women around dress, social interactions, education, work, and public presence. So it can be seen as a loss of honor to the father, brother, or husband if a woman does not comply with these expectations. And these are some of the issues that come up with women participating now that they're here in public ways. So Afghans are acutely aware that projecting dignity and scrupulously protecting the dignity of others is essential to good communication, and criticism is rarely given directly. For example, I've heard stories of teenage Afghan boys who display a very strong reaction or feel provoked to protect the honor of the Afghan girls in their school. So if a non-Afghan boy takes a picture of a girl or smiles or tries to talk to her, then the Afghan boys will call that boy out in the park and tell them, give them a warning maybe, or start a fight, and, with injuries and problematic issues happening because they feel that they have to protect the honor of these Afghan girls. In addition, familial, tribal, and ethnic rivalries persist among some of the arrivals, and these tensions may get played out in school among the students. With respect to family, the core notion of public versus private is at play. So private is both physical and social. Family members are part of the private sphere. An Afghan home is like a fortress surrounded by high mud brick walls in the countryside, and social space faces an inner courtyard. The outside walls don't have any windows. And even, I mean, I've seen many Afghan homes I visited in the diaspora keep the windows covered one way or another so that people shouldn't be able to look inside. Multiple generations will live in a shared space like this. They may cook together or not. There's a lot of sharing of the raising of children. There's precious little sense of privacy or private space in an Afghan household. Remember, or I hadn't even mentioned, but they're large families, as you probably all know, with I think maybe an average of 8 children. And so private space is hard to come by. Families tend to sleep, especially in the countryside, in beds that are lined up at night and put away during the day. And I would say social isolation is considered severe punishment, and the notion of time out would be considered cruel. Even in urban areas, and this is a photo from Kabul, the space is limited and people live in small compounds, also not looking over walls, or apartment complexes, of course. Women's sphere is in the home. So women are in charge of the domestic chores, the cooking, the cleaning, the raising children, preparing food for guests. And here too, of course, there's a hierarchy with the mother at the top, delegating tasks to her daughters and daughters-in-law. And the newest bride is the lowest in the pecking order. And the wife of the oldest son is sort of next in line to be matriarch. In general, gender roles are clearly defined. Women dominate in the domestic sphere, and household tasks are distributed among daughters. This is also true in the diaspora. So a lot of the burden of the household tasks does fall on the girls in the house. Laundry is a big issue when you have a large family, and laundry is done by hand, well, certainly in the countryside, and even at home by women. They prefer to do it themselves. It's a point of privacy and pride to do their family's laundry, and laundromats are not welcome. Small portable washers are what make great gifts to people, or that's what Afghans prefer. Afghans, particularly in Afghanistan, don't change their clothes very often. They don't put on pajamas to go to sleep at night. Personal hygiene comes at a high cost in Afghanistan, where water is scarce and heating it requires precious fuel. And even in some areas, pregnant women believe it's bad for the baby if they shower. Not all Afghanistan looks like that picture you just saw, which was actually where I lived in Afghanistan. This might be where Zala lived in Afghanistan. Is this your house, Zala?
Sorry, I'm mute. This is my friend's house.
Okay.
Nahid. She is also now in Alexandria. She was evacuated. Yeah, that's her house.
Okay, so you can see the contrast.
But I'm the one in blue there.
Right, right, exactly. So not all of Afghanistan looks like the countryside, but that, the urban educated people with means can live quite comfortably. And the contrast is important to take in, because many of the people who are here are from the countryside, but not all, of course. Babies are swaddled for most of their first year. This is what they use, a sash basically to swaddle them with, and rub kohl, K-O-H-L, into the baby's eyes to make them look attractive. And Afghan women are valued muchly by the number of sons they produce. And Afghan families, particularly in the countryside, have very, very large families, and women give birth often alone, rarely in hospitals in the countryside, rarely with midwives, and maternal and infant mortality can be quite high in those circumstances. Few women have had access to prenatal care in Afghanistan, and many who came through the military bases here experienced prenatal care for the first time. Men's role is chiefly outside the home. So in the public sphere, they are responsible for families' economic well-being. All males in the household will work to economically support the group, ideally, especially in both rural and urban areas. But in rural areas, women have neither the time nor the means to work outside the home. Sometimes they earn a little extra money with embroidery, tailoring, food preparation. But in urban areas, women have had more opportunities through education to work outside the home and bring income to their families. Family structure is quite traditional, patriarchal, where most decisions are taken by the father or husband, and age hierarchy applies as well. But of course, much of this is in flux, particularly among the urban and educated. But because many of the Afghans who have come here are from the countryside and they are non-literate, women are expected to stay home, and it may take several years of resettlement before women have the opportunity to learn our language, our local language, to work, or even to learn how to drive. So these are obstacles that they face. Pastimes are mostly very social, such as visiting families and friends, where stories and gossip are shared, and gossip is, by many people's measures, a national sport. Dry fruit and nuts are served with green tea and cardamom at any time when Afghans get together. It's the most minimal gesture of hospitality. And accepting or offering tea is proper etiquette. You don't really have to drink in the tea if somebody offers it to you, but you should never refuse it, because that could be seen as an insult. And sometimes people feel insulted if they're not offered tea. So tea is more than just about drinking the tea. It's really a gesture of friendship, respect, and hospitality. Pets are usually birds of some kind in Afghanistan. Afghans don't keep house pets. Dogs are particularly considered dirty and should not belong in the house. So many people are afraid of dogs and don't interact well with them when they go to American houses with dogs. Children show deference and respect to their elders. Even when grown-up, children expect their parents have wisdom and know what is best for them and trust them to make important life decisions for them. They respect their parents' wishes and they take their advice from elders. This extends often to marriage partners. Most marriages are arranged by parents, not all, of course. Arranging marriages, celebrating engagements, entertaining guests are hugely important to Afghans. And in some cases, parents engage their babies to each other to solidify bonds, sometimes even before they're born. In other cases, individuals find their own mates in love marriages, but more so among the urban and educated. There's a considerable range of attitudes among Afghans toward education. In rural areas, there's widespread reserve about education, particularly for girls, and education is limited and quite low by comparison to the US and other countries. Lack of literacy is commonplace and not shameful. And adjustment to English in schools is a very huge issue for many of these students. For students in families with non-literate parents, the challenge of educational compliance and investment can be quite an issue. Schools are, for the most part, in Afghanistan, gender segregated. Afghan parents are not typically involved in their children's education, although teachers are held in high regard. So corporal punishment is still used at home and in school in Afghanistan. For those who have not previously attended school, some basic skills such as learning to ask questions, taking turns, or even lining up might be new. And not knowing the right answers can be seen as a personal reflection of weakness. And as I said earlier, as a negative reflection on the family, the tribe, or the ethnicity. So being able to admit not knowing the answer will come at a high cost. And you may find that students are shy to raise their hands, to share their concerns, or to ask a question. They may be embarrassed not to know the answer, or concerned about what other students might think of them because how others think about them and how they are judged is extremely important to them, to their sense of honor. Education in Afghanistan has traditionally been a process of rote memorization, so abstract reasoning and critical thinking are the crux of our education system, but not theirs. And a student's responsibility for producing their own work, research papers, exams, for example, may be new to many. Students copy each other's works. They have brothers and sisters and cousins do some of their assignments for them, or they will copy directly off the internet because they don't know that plagiarism is not okay. So the levels of integrity here is quite high, and people from not only Afghanistan, but other countries have very different standards about educational integrity. After school activities and sleepovers are not that likely to happen for a long time, especially for girls, maybe ever. Teenage girls may already be engaged, and dating is forbidden. So the lack of socialization with non-Afghans makes learning English even that much harder and more challenging for Afghan students, particularly the girls. So I'm going to summarize a few of those points that we talked about with educational issues. So attitudes and perceptions of parents towards education plays a key role in how they will handle their children's schooling. The educational systems are quite different between the US and Afghanistan. There is no mandatory education in Afghanistan, so there's no mandatory attendance there. Mothers do not feel responsible for their children's education. It's customarily the father's role. And with large families, it makes it hard to pay attention to the individuals. And parents don't participate in their children's education. That's something that happens outside the home over there, and they don't help with homework or track daily progress, or even, they don't follow up with emails in a timely fashion, or phone calls, or, follow up with things that the school is asking them to follow up with. It's just not the way education has been done in their past. There's also no culture of reading really in Afghanistan, or bedtime stories, for example. So performance in school, given the language barrier without socializing, is hard. And even in the old days when you could watch television and learn English, there's so many streaming, community specific streaming services that make it even harder to have influence from outside. So people watch Afghan channels they stream Afghan channels. Educational integrity, such as copying homework or exams from others, is they don't have the same notions about plagiarism, cheating, or honesty codes, and they might need to be informed multiple times and help to understand why it matters. Dress is an issue where some students have been bullied because of their religion or their dress, or wearing headscarves. Sometimes students are bullied for wearing headscarves, and then they stop wearing them. And then when they come home, their families harass them or, implore them because they haven't been wearing their headscarves. And many girls get kind of torn into this between, the sense of identity is problematic for them. Afghan teenage boys, as I said earlier, might feel that it's upon them to defend the honor and by policing the girls in their community and their schools, or fighting with anyone that they feel has infringed on the girls. So those are all concerns. While some changes have happened in the past 20 years of US with US and coalition involvement in Afghanistan, those changes apply less to rural areas where most of the evacuees come from. And certainly women and girls were subjected to strict dress codes and excluded from work outside the home, denied access to education and healthcare during the previous Taliban regime. It's going to be just as bad, if not worse, this time around. So, however, Afghanistan is a conservative society, and there's no question that women and girls have been limited even during the past 20 years. And it's, not surprise. It's really an Afghan notion that women should not be seen by men outside the family, and Afghan women are typically accompanied by a mahram, a male escort, and you would find that happening here as well. And though women have fought hard to gain legitimacy and authority in public decision-making in Afghanistan, many still are obedient to their fathers, brothers, and husbands. And so women and girls in school often will not speak before men do, and may not speak at all in the presence of males. I've spoken to many accomplished Afghan women, activists, ministers, business leaders, and they always emphasize how their fathers made sure they were educated. And they point out that this is the exception, not the rule. And Salah has said the same. So it speaks to the importance of the father in the role of supporting education. Socialization outside the immediate family tends to be gender segregated. Men socialize with men and women with women, and this doesn't apply across the board. Urban settings and formal settings, there may be mixed, but mostly it's gender segregated. Men hold men's hands, it's a sign of friendship, and women are affectionate with women. And in general, cross-gender contact, not a good idea. So if a man puts his hand out to shake a woman's hand, that's fine, that's a sign of respect. But if a man doesn't shake his hand, that's also a sign of respect. Sometimes men avert their eyes not to look at a woman. It's not disrespect, it's actually out of respect. And it's hard to experience that, and it's important to understand that that's what's being conveyed. So I wanted to talk a little bit about communication because communication styles are quite different. I'd say there's a general statement that characterizes the difference between communication strategies between our American modes of communication and Afghan modes of communication. And that would be that some things need to be said and some things need to be understood. So we Americans need to say stuff. Like we need to put it out there. We're very speaker focused and we're very explicit in our forms of communication. We don't rely on implication, and we are not very good at reading nonverbal expression or cues. And our mode of communication is considered low context, which means we don't expect everybody to know what we're talking about when we have something to communicate. By contrast, Afghanistan is high context. It's about what is meant to be understood. It's about the hearer. It's about meaning being embedded in social, cultural context. And so much is communicated implicitly. And the focus is on what is understood, not so much on what is said. So this is what we call an indirect style. People use analogies and stories and implications to communicate. This connects, of course, with notions of honor because Afghan communication is at all costs mutually preserving of dignity and honor, and people avoid infringing on someone else's dignity or honor through their communication. So admitting you don't have the right answer could cause a loss of honor, or asking for assistance might show weakness. And certainly if you ask someone if they understood what you were talking about, it would embarrass them to say no. So chances are they'll say yes, even if they don't. So triangulating around finding out if they do understand is probably the best way. Afghans don't like to say no because they don't want to cause disappointment. So they're incredibly gracious and polite. And sometimes they'll say yes to things that they really would like to say no to, but they can't say no. But you'll understand by implication that they meant no. Afghans don't typically say thank you. That's very American. They've certainly picked that up here, but they might have other ways of being thankful. And so I think that being the best possible listener you can is the best advice I could give around this issue. There's a great expression someone once said to me, which is that Americans have watches and Afghans have time. And this partly has to do with different structures of our society. Ours is highly commodified and monetized, and punctuality matters. And it's not a shared notion in Afghanistan, and will be a challenge and take time to adjust. And also time is viewed more flexibly. So bedtime, parent-teacher meetings, getting to school on time, excused absences can all be challenges for Afghan resettlement. We're just about at the end of the talk, and I wanted to turn to a few aspects of domestic life that may or may not be relevant to you, but Afghans are used to eating fresh food. So most village homes don't have refrigerators. And I should say in urban homes, where electricity is not that reliable, refrigeration is not that reliable either. So food is prepared daily and fresh, and bread is baked in a tandoor oven is kind of the mainstay. Naan is the mainstay of the diet. Afghans sit down together, often on the floor. They eat at tables too, as you've seen, but sitting around a tablecloth on the floor is very comfortable. And hospitality is extremely important to Afghans. They're incredibly gracious hosts, and you might be lucky enough to be invited to such a meal. Takeout is kind of, Afghans prefer their own cooking, although pizza, as long as it doesn't have sausage on it, is universally enjoyed. Preventative medical care, dental care, eye care, exercise, heart healthy eating, mindfulness, attention to mental health and stress. Those are all new notions for the Afghans and will take time. Afghans have a very strong sense of style preferences, as anyone would. Used clothing is not a popular choice as it is here in some circles. A friend of mine was a recipient of several people's used coats. Everybody was worried that she wasn't dressed warmly enough for a harsh Vermont winter. And she was insulted by the implication that people might think that she would want their used clothing. And she had her mother send her coat from Kabul because it was her style and her aesthetic. So whether a woman wears a headscarf or not, these are personal and family decisions, but they can become contentious in some settings here in the US. So, and to summarize Afghan families in general, family is the most important thing. Protecting the dignity and respecting others is is what informs most of communication and ways that people behave. Avoiding embarrassment or dishonor or dishonoring others is very important. Be mindful of gender roles and relations. They're quite clearly circumscribed. Men have public lives and economic responsibilities. Women have home-based lives and home-based responsibilities. The hospitality, loyalty, and modesty are highly valued, and communication is indirect and protective of the listeners and speaker's dignity, and by implication, and not always easy to know what is being said because it's not explicit. And it goes without saying that trauma, 45 years of war, broken promises, displacement, weak government, untrustworthy authorities have taken a toll, and trauma contributes to so many of the personal and social problems that Afghans experience. So many of the Afghans here are deeply in our debt, and that does feel like weak, to some of them, and they were self-sufficient at home, many highly educated and working in positions of respect, and so much of that is gone for them. And their families, most of them are back in Afghanistan. The separation weighs very heavily on them. So these are just some of the things that weigh on the Afghans while they're trying to make the best of their lives here in the US. So I'm going to open it. How much time we have left, I'm not sure, to questions, conversation, but remember, of course, we'll have another chance next week to discuss further. So I'll stop my share.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Any questions? This was amazing. Always learning something. Yeah, Brooke.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was really interesting. We have quite a few people on the call in higher education, and I'm wondering if there's anything that we should be thinking about when welcoming new college students to campus.
I'm gonna send that to Zala, who has a sister who came here very recently and is a college student, so she would have the best advice.
Thank you, Rachel. Even like myself, when I started school here, I came for my master's, but I would say language barrier is that would be a challenge for most of the students, Afghan students, because even if they have been to a private school in Afghanistan or a university, let's say for 1 or 2 years, it's still like it's not as it is here. So language would be an issue, and I would like doing assignments or like assignments that would need research. That would be something that like research and surveys and all of that. So I don't know, like, but schools and universities, they should come up with ways to help them. And as we talked about the being embarrassed or shy to really ask questions or like ask for help. So that's a cultural thing. So maybe if the teachers would really find ways that they share that problem. Yeah, I think language would be the issue. And in terms of other issues related to culture, there anything can happen, but not with every student, such as like related to honor. If there are Afghan girls, let's say, and they're being like, dating, the issue of dating and like, participation in social events or any event in the college. These are the challenges that they would face, but it really depends on the family, like if they come from the urban parts of Afghanistan, that might be okay for them to some extent. But if they're really, from rural parts, which I don't think so, because if they come from rural parts, they are not educated. So to come to the college, so still probably most of them, they are from the cities in Afghanistan. So so those are other issues, but I don't know how much or to what extent the college would help with them. The only two things that I'm thinking is the language barrier. Definitely they would face that issue, and also like research and survey related assignments, because that's not a thing in Afghanistan education system as such, to do projects and to be creative and critical thinking and all that. These skills are not taught in schools and encouraged.
Right, and owning your own education. So the educational integrity, not taking exams for other people or doing other people's homework or copying, those are going to be, big hurdles, I think. And we don't want to punish them because they don't know it's not the way you get educated here. So.
Yeah, even like partly doing that is because it's a language barrier, so that it might be easier for them to just go and Google, right, something or a topic, and that's why it's good to have orientations or probably training sessions on all these issues.
A lot of support. Yeah, just a lot of support for that stuff. So Mila, I see you raised your hand. Yeah. You're mute. I think you're muted.
Okay, I just want to make a comment. I came to the United States from the former Soviet Union and from the southern part of the Union, which is called Azerbaijan. I was born in Baku. And Azerbaijani language is not the same as Persian, but there are some words, some expressions that are very, very similar. So this year, to be exact, about a month ago, I had a new arrival, a kid from Afghanistan, an incredible young man. And he was so excited when I didn't know how to say that in Afghani or in Persian. And I said, "Hoş geldiniz." And hoş, you know,
Right.
because Azerbaijani is the same.
Right.
So anyway, he looked at me, he got so excited. And he started talking to me in Persian. I said, no, that's as much as I know. But that helped me build a stronger connection with not only with the boy, his family. His father is very, very much interested in his son's getting education with me, and his sister is in high school. And I am very, very excited that he had joined my program. It used to be only Hispanic population, Hispanic students, but now I'm so happy that there are more and more kids from all over the world joining us. And I call my students sometimes United Nations group, because more and more kids are coming from different parts of the world, and I'm so happy. And I usually tell them I would like to call my program Crossroads. Crossroads room. And they say, why? I said, I had to travel long distance from the Soviet Union to come to Pittsfield and meet all of you here. And the same happened to you. So, and I also want to say that I had arrived to the United States as a refugee. And I really sympathize with situations most of my kids, and especially this boy, I don't know, he's had experience in life, but I'm glad that he's in a much better place, and I'm ready to help him and whoever will be coming. And I know that there will be more kids coming in September.
Right.
So
well, I really appreciate that you mentioned the language thing, because I really believe strongly in learning to say "Hoş amadi," welcome, or "Khodafez," or any of those things. Just those little expressions will make such a difference. So I appreciate you raising that issue, even if you were only close, but it was close.
Yeah.
Right,
and you
so
know
I
what?
see that,
Sometimes I want to try some words. Like I said, sen müellime tanışırsın. Müellime, müellime, mektep. So I said, yeah, these words actually exist in your language. But anyway.
Yeah, thank you. I see that Shatoya has her hand up.
Yes.
Oh, but you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Yes, very briefly. Thank you. I had a question. First of all, thank you for this presentation. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the culture, and I appreciate that you're bringing it into perspective. I wanted to know if anyone of the Afghan culture had anything else to add that was either said in the presentation that could be elaborated on, that's very important to take into account, or something that was missed at all.
Like, if you mean, did we miss something in this presentation? Was there something we didn't talk about?
Ideally, to hear from someone from the Afghans culture, their perspective on what was said, if there's anything that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, Zala
yeah.
is my co-presenter here, and she is an Afghan, and she and I created this presentation together with both of our knowledge. So if you have anything else you wanted to add, Zala?
Well, nothing that comes to my mind. Definitely, each of those topics needs more like discussion, depending on the question from the audience, and or in I mean, any challenge, specific challenges that the students or the education, like the schools face, then we can definitely elaborate more on those topics. But so far, I believe that we have. Covered everything. And one thing that I always discuss with Rachel is also that life in Afghanistan, because you are receiving two really different groups from Afghanistan. One is really urban and one is really rural. That's the issue, because families of the soldiers, Afghan soldiers who fought with the US military, they're mostly from rural parts of Afghanistan, where their women and girls, they have never seen a school, or they have just been inside their homes. On the other hand, we have this other educated elite group who lived in cities, and they mostly worked with the international donor community on programs. So this is the most educated community. So that's the only thing that I would add, that we have to be very mindful that it's good to understand the culture, but it doesn't apply every aspect of it, and like apply differently to these two different groups.
Thank you.
I would say there are lots of things we haven't talked about, lots of things we haven't talked about, but we were trying to, hit on the most important things we felt were relevant for you.
There is one last question in the chat by Amanda. She's asking, what is a good way to approach the topic of plagiarism after an incident, especially with teens? Any thoughts on that?
I'll start, because Zala will jump in. That's usually how we do it. But I'm not sure, but certainly not a reprimand, not a, just not. I would start with pointing out, where the problem is, and that we can tell that this is not yours, and you can't. In America, education is about learning and for yourself, and it's not just about getting a certain achievement, but about the learning and helping people understand where the focus of education is part of it. But I think it's going to take a lot of patience on the part of the educators, because it's something that most Americans are taught from a young age, about not copying and not taking other people's ideas. And so I don't know, Zala, what you think would be the best way to respond to these issues for an educator, to respond to teens who are copying?
I've never been a teacher, but from what I would suggest, that of course orientation or really explaining the policy, that would be something that it's must, so they know, but still it will take time because they're not used to it. It's like okay, don't let your kids play in a parking lot because the police can come and arrest you. They wouldn't take that serious unless they are arrested, or their kids are in trouble. So then they will realize. So it's the same with this issue also. Once they are failed, let's say, if they don't still listen, that would be one way, is like to learn the hard way, which they can fail class because they did that. Or if they can also be assigned in groups with other students so that they learn how it's done. A project.
Well, like a mentor, like a partner, right?
Yeah, like they can see that, okay, how they do that, or they, even their classmates can better also tell them, oh, we cannot just go in Google and then just paste the thing, we have to write in our own language, even if we Google, but then we have to rephrase it or anything. So I would say that's the only thing that comes to my mind. If they can also work in a group of 2 or larger groups, that would be helpful for them to get that help from their classmates.
Yeah, and I would say that students really, especially at this higher level, need a lot of support still, and that some kind of buddy system might be a good way, so it's not, they don't have to raise their hand in class or be called out, but have somebody who kind of supports them through it. But I'm not a classroom teacher either.
It's very helpful still, I think. I think we're running out of time. I don't want to keep you on a work day. Mm-hmm. But please come back next week. We're going to have the live Q&A. We'll have more time to ask all of the questions, and you can ask Rachel and Zala whatever you have in mind. I'll follow up with the Zoom link for next week. I will send it the day before just so you have it in your calendars. And if you have a question, please feel free to reach out to me or Yeah. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Enjoy your weekend. It looks
Thank
like
you all
it's
for your
gonna be really
time.
nice out.
Bye.
Have a good day.
You did.